UN Special Envoy starts consultations with delegates of Yemeni political parties in Amman today. Angelina Jolie is in Yemen to mobilize international efforts in increasing humanitarian aid for displaced people in the country. The United States announced that Houthi militia fired the missile into maritime of the Red Sea last week. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. The United Nations Special Envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg, started a series of consultations Monday in Amman in Jordan. Bilateral meetings with leaders from the General People's Congress Party and delegations from Islah, the Yemeni Socialist Parties and Nasserist People's Organization will take place. Grunberg said there is an urgent need to establish an inclusive political process that reverses the dire humanitarian crisis and provides opportunities and space for dialogue at multiple levels. Special Envoy for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Angelina Jolie arrived at Yemen for a first visit of its kind. The visit aims to mobilize international efforts as to increase aid for refugees in the country. More details on this are in the following report.
In a veil and a cloak, Hollywood actors and UN Special Envoy Angelina Jolie arrives in Yemen to draw the world's attention towards the catastrophic crisis in Yemen, which has been ongoing for more than 7 years. Jolie landed in the southern coastal city of Aden to meet with families and refugees there, especially displaced families, to show solidarity in the hope of mobilizing support for an incoming fundraising conference. The actress decided to have a visit to Yemeni families to hear directly from them how the war has ripped their lives apart.
We don't have lives here. We are struggling to have the basic needs. I swear to God, we have nothing left.
The UN Refugee Agency said it hopes that Julie's visit would draw attention to growing humanitarian needs in Yemen and help mobilize urgent support for humanitarian work ahead of the annual high-level pledging conference for Yemen on March 16.
And part of my job is to make sure that the international community understands how serious the situation is.
We've come today to accompany the UN humanitarian official in her visit to see the burden of displaced people here.
This visit left an impact on Jolie, so she described the situation of Yemen on her Instagram account as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, with 1 civilian killed or injured every hour in 2022. She further stated that the economy of Yemen has been devastated by war and over 20 million Yemenis are depending on humanitarian assistance to survive. The situation in Yemen keeps aggravating due to the civil war since 2014, when the Houthi militia took control of the capital Sana'a and the country's north, which led to the catastrophe in which Yemeni citizens are suffering till now. After Julie's visit to Yemen, she compared the appalling situation there to what is currently happening on the ground in Ukraine, and she mentioned that as people continue to watch the situation in Ukraine and call for an immediate end to the conflict, she conducted her visit in Yemen to support people who also desperately need peace, according to her statement. Jolie highlighted that the lives of civilian victims of wars everywhere are of equal value, and after 7 years of war, people in Yemen also need protection, support, and above all, they need peace.
Yemen's permanent representative to the League of Arab States, Ambassador Riyad Al-Akbari, participated in the 157th session held in Cairo. The meeting issued a draft resolution submitted by Yemen affirming commitment to Yemen's unity, sovereignty, security, and stability. The draft resolution supported the government's position on adopting the option of peace and United Nations efforts in order to resume the political process. It also supported the Saudi peace initiative in Yemen calling on the international community to urgently help solve the tragedy of the displaced Yemenis and stopping the Houthi groups targeting their displaced camps. The Houthi militia has put extra restrictions on people and political opponents. This has caused a wave of resentment among people. Some people took to streets and had signs and slogans calling for the departure of the Houthi militia that were seen written on the walls in the capital. The following report has more details.
Houthis must leave. a new slogan that filled the walls in Sana'a, the Yemeni capital, and in other areas under the Houthi control. The slogans could be a prelude to an unbridled popular uprising that would hit these areas for a growing discontent and uproar against Houthi violations. There are standing appeals to the international community to pressure Houthi militia to stop their violations related to the looting of Yemeni livelihoods as well as humanitarian aid. Monitor for Rights and Freedoms said it had documented more than 48 cases of looting and confiscation by the militia of the properties of civilians and political opponents in Al-Mahwid Governorate. The organization condemned the looting, which included homes, cars, cash, and private property. It indicated that the militia is adapting laws and regulations to facilitate its control over the properties of civilians who oppose its rule. The Houthi looting is considered a collective punishment against civilians that is punished as a war crime in international humanitarian law. As to the humanitarian aid, the rebels continue to block work of international and local organizations. Accusations are mounting that the militia are making the humanitarian situation in Yemen worse. The rebels stormed global food warehouses in Hajj Governorate, looting more than 100 tons of flour and transferring aid to their fighters. Documented Houthi violations included manipulating the names of beneficiaries and imposing illicit fees or relief programs. The latest violations are getting people under the rule of the Houthi rebels to stand against them and may propel a new reality in the war-torn Yemen.
Kidnapping international aid workers has become a game in the hand of the Houthi militia and other extremist groups. A recent incident of this is the abduction of 2 foreign staff working with Doctors Without Borders in eastern Hadramaut. The organization said it lost contact with some of its staff in Yemen, citing concern over their safety. The following report has more details.
Yemenis are not the only ones subjected to flagrant human rights violations on their land. Gunmen with varied affiliations have taken it upon themselves to target personnel working for foreign entities, whose mission is to deliver aid to war-torn Yemen. 2 international staffers of Doctors Without Borders were kidnapped by gunmen in Yemen's eastern Hadramaut province, according to a security source and 2 additional local sources. The medical organization stated that it had lost communication with several of its personnel on their mission to Yemen, and that it couldn't provide any further information at this time due to concerns for their safety. The employees, 1 German and 1 Mexican, were seized from their car by gunmen suspected to be associated with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, according to the security source. A Yemeni Interior Minister source stated that a military effort was underway to find the kidnappers. But that's nowhere near the first time abductions have occurred on Yemeni soil. Hundreds of foreigners have been kidnapped in Yemen over the years, most of them by members of the country's highly armed tribes demanding concessions from the authorities. Several Westerners have been imprisoned by Iran-backed Houthi rebels, although the majority have been released. A number of foreigners have been kidnapped in Yemen by the country's heavily armed tribes throughout the years, and there have also been several jihadist kidnappings. Last month, 5 UN staff members were seized in the southern province of Abiyan while returning to the port city of Aden after having concluded a field operation. The UN estimates that as of 2021, the conflict has killed 377,000 people, both directly and indirectly through famine and illness, and millions of people have been displaced in what it calls the world's biggest humanitarian disaster. It is likely that this won't be the last time the government turns a blind eye to the lax security measures that enable gunmen to carry out their violations, whether the abductions occur in government areas or under Houthi supervision.
Turning to the military scene in Yemen, fighting has erupted between the government forces and the Houthi rebels in Hajj Governorate. Military sources said fierce battles between the 2 sides took place in several locations on Harad front, during which the militia sustained heavy losses in equipment and lives. The battles coincided with a series of air raids that targeted several Houthi locations, gatherings, and an operation command center, destroying at least 9 vehicles. In the neighboring Saada Governorate, the government forces launched a surprise attack with direct support from the coalition fighters. During the attack, the government forces liberated several sites and forced the Houthi militia to flee after incurring heavy losses among them. The U.S. Navy announced that Houthi militia launched at least 1 missile into the busy waters of Red Sea by the end of last week. The U.S. Navy official added such attacks raise the risks of targeting one of the many commercial vessels, using a waterway crucial to global shipping. Since seizing Yemen's capital in September 2014, Houthis have launched missiles, deployed bomb-laden drone boats, and released mines into the Red Sea. The International Financial Action Task Force decided to keep Yemen on the grey list. The decision includes countries that have not made sufficient efforts to eliminate money laundering and terrorist financing. The organization said since February 2010, Yemen has made progress to improve its action, including criminalizing money laundering and terrorist financing. However, it has been unable to conduct an on-site visit to confirm whether the process of implementing the required reforms and actions has begun and is being sustained. Dozens of traders and importers closed a land port in Al Mahra, rejecting the government's decision to raise the customs dollar tariff. Traders and importers asked the government to reduce customs duties and cancel its decision to raise fees, stressing that it negatively affects the commercial and investment movement at the port. The merchants and the importers said they will continue to close the land port and will continue the sit-in until all their demands are met. Last August, the government decided to raise the price of the custom dollar from 250 riyals to 500 riyals. Coming next. How fuel restrictions on fuel trucks entry worsen the crisis of fuel nationwide.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف والكيس الدقيق ب18 ألف والكيس السكر اليوم ب20 ألف. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل كيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة لما أخرج لما ندي في القيلة ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل داخل ما إحنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. The United Nations declared that lack of food aid destroys millions of families in Yemen. The United Nations World Food Programme outlined that people are waiting in long lines to receive food aid in Ma'rib. It warned that food prices continue to rise and cuts in food aid are devastating for millions whose survival depends on it. The capital Sana'a is witnessing a stifling crisis in domestic gas, with its prices on the black market rising to record numbers. Local sources said the value of a domestic gas cylinder in the black markets amounted to about 23,000 riyals. At the same time, distribution of gas cylinders to citizens from the gas company has stopped. The sources indicated that the capital's bakeries are facing difficulty in providing people's needs due to the increased demand. Houthi militia continues to fabricate a fuel crisis in the country nationwide by preventing entry of the trucks from Al Jawf into Sana'a and the rest of the Houthi-controlled areas. This has doubled the suffering of people. More on this is in the following report.
Fuel shortages in the capital Sana'a and other Houthi-held areas have left Yemenis clinging on to window frames and riding on car roofs as demands for public transportation rise and people queue for days on end to fill their car tanks. In the war-torn country, university students worry that the gasoline shortage is interfering with their studies, adding that their arrival delay causes them to miss their lectures or be marked as absent on the roster. They report that taxis are far and in between, and the ones they find are overcrowded. Markets and health clinics are also difficult to reach. On the parallel market, 20 liters of gasoline cost 9,500 riyals, or $16, a price that is unaffordable to the greater segment of the population. Because of the economic collapse caused by the 7-year-long war, almost 80% of Yemen's population requires aid. The fuel crisis affects the whole population, from the ordinary to those on top. Neither officials nor dignitaries are excluded, sources have stated. After years of full and partial siege by Houthi militia, as well as negligence by the Yemen Gas Company and local authorities, the supply of liquefied petroleum gas satisfies less than half of demands at times. A black market has flourished, fueled by unlawful supply diversion and resulting in prices that are twice those charged by gas providers. Efforts made by local governments to relieve the situation have failed. The protracted gas crisis has had serious political, social, economic, health, environmental, and security consequences for all societies under Houthi control, but most notably for the poorest and most vulnerable. It is critical that the situation be remedied as soon as possible. Civil servants in Sana'a have called on the concerned authorities, international organizations, and the UN to lift the siege on oil derivatives and basic food commodities for people to have a minimum livelihood.
Migrants from the African Horn continue to flock to Yemen. According to the United Nations Migration Agency, over 35,000 migrants have reached the country. This has aggravated the crisis in Yemen. The following report has more details.
As if the city of Aden is doomed to witness tragedies, the Houthi militia again are conducting war crimes, but this time against Ethiopian refugees. Thousands of Ethiopian refugees live on a piece of land in Aden's Khor Maksar. Many of them were forcibly displaced as the militia has burned their detention center in Sana'a, which resorted around 900 migrants. These migrants were detained due to their refusal to contribute in the ongoing conflicts on the fronts of the militia. 3 African refugees are lying down now in Khor Maksar area, and they were found washing their children's clothes in the tents, of which are made of tree branches and threadbare cloth. This dramatic scene reflects on the full picture of the country's catastrophe, which is erupted by the Houthi militia. The refugees in Khor Maksar rely on donations from the residents, and they have offered to wash cars. They complain of the minor donations provided by the International Organization for Migration and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. The International Organization for Migration in Yemen has said that, in spite of the raging conflict there, the country is still a main crossing for migrants from the Horn of Africa. It registered the arrival of 27,693 migrants in Yemen in 2021. The main crossing points in Yemen are dotted along its southern coast, in the cities of Lahj, Shabwa, Hadramaut, and Taiz. Conflict in Africa has pushed people to resume taking the trip of death from the continent across the Gulf of Aden to reach Yemen and eventually the Gulf countries. This illegal activity spiked in the late 2021 after a notable dip. Migrants from Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Somalia often risk death by riding in boats from their countries, seeking safer shores in Yemen. They begin their dangerous journey from Ethiopia, departing towards the Mandeb Strait and reaching Lahja and Taiz shores. Wars always push people from bad to worse, as they knock on new doors in an attempt to find hope. However, they are driven to fate worse than they expected on Yemen's coastal shores.
Here is a reminder of the main headlines. The UN Special Envoy starts consultations with delegates of Yemeni political parties in Amman today. Angelina Jolie is in Yemen to mobilize international efforts in increasing humanitarian aid for displaced people in the country. The United States announced that Houthi militia fired a missile into maritime of the Red Sea last week. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. This is Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.